Hey, Crow back again, and I've recently played all the games in this Evercade cart, Irem Arcade 1. There are 6 games in this collection, and they were originally released between 1982 and 1993. Half the games included are shoot-em-ups, however they're each pretty distinctive from one another. The other half of the collection consists of a football game that's not really a football game, a relatively unknown slash-em-up, and an early Irem classic that'll have you patrolling the moon. As with every Evercade release, the cartridge comes in a clamshell case, along with a full-color manual, and there are no additional bonuses to this one. This collection was originally bundled with the Evercade EXP, however it is playable on any Evercade device, and I played these games on the Evercade VS using an arcade stick. Alright, I'm interrupting this video because after I filmed everything, I decided I was going to change the way I was doing ratings back to the way I used to do them. I get a lot of comments on my older videos from people saying that they liked the way I did it. It was simple, it was easy to understand, and I totally get that. And I thought by changing it would make it easier for me, but in fact it made it more difficult. So I'm going back to the way I used to do it. From 1 to 5 on the screen, I'm showing you basically what it was, but I'm not going to do 1 to 5. I'm actually going to change it to 1 to 10. It's basically the same value I was using recently, except now I've put numbers attached to them. I think I just changed the name of one of them. But it should be really straightforward, just scoring from 1 to 10. A 1 through a 4 is basically something I don't like. A 5 or a 6 is something I'm like in the middle on. And then a 7 through 10, it would be something I do like. So yeah, other than changing it from a 1 to 5, I'm changing it to a 1 to 10. Everything's going to be the way it used to be. So let's get started with the earliest game and proceed in order of release. First up is Moon Patrol, which was released to arcades in 1982. While Irem distributed the game in Japan, it was licensed to Williams for release in North America. It's a fairly well-known game where you're in control of a moon buggy cruising along the lunar surface, jumping or shooting ground obstacles, while also defending yourself from the occasional alien attack. The buggy is always in motion, though you can always accelerate or slow down to a certain extent. Your buggy has 2 guns mounted to it, one facing forward and one facing upwards. One button fires both guns, however both guns behave differently. The gun facing forward can only have 1 bullet on the screen and can only travel a limited distance, while the gun facing upwards can have up to 4 bullets on the screen, which nearly allows for constant rapid fire. While many of the ground targets can be destroyed with a bullet, you'll need to press the jump button to leap craters and landmines. The game's main challenge comes from trying to defend yourself from alien attacks while also successfully dodging and destroying ground obstacles. You'll also need to pay extra attention to the one type of alien ship that will cause craters with its bullets because it kinda sucks to successfully dodge a shot from the alien ship only to crash into the crater it created. I always try to take out the alien ships as quickly as possible while also keeping in mind that the alien shots can be cancelled out by your own. The game starts with the beginner's course and is broken up into 26 sections labeled A through Z. If you happen to lose a life, you get to continue at the start of the sections you were destroyed in. At 5 points during the course, the game will take a break and award you bonus points if your time was quick enough. After completing the beginner's course, you'll always receive bonus points for that, and then you'll move on to the champion course, which has some new obstacles and is much more difficult. Completing the champion course will just cause it to repeat again and again until all your lives are gone. That kind of tripped me up because I didn't immediately realize it was repeating because it's labeled Champion Course 1 and then Champion Course 2 and so on. So I thought they were different. But nope, the game's just keeping track of what loop you're in. Now I like Moon Patrol, but I always kind of found adjusting the speed of the buggy to be a bit odd as it never seems to be speeding up or slowing down as it actually is. It only becomes apparent if you do something like jump a large crater while holding left, because as soon as you leave, you know you ain't gonna make it. It always takes a bit of time to get used to that. Well, that and the fact that your buggy is a pretty big target for not only those alien attacks, but you've also got to remember that the entire buggy has to clear any hazard you jump over. There were plenty of times where it seemed like I was gonna clear a crater, only for the rear end of the buggy to hit the edge and drag the entire thing backwards into the crater and explode. But it's all part of the challenge, I suppose. But my favorite thing about this game has always been that catchy tune that plays while you're cruising the lunar surface, and also the deep bass of the explosions whenever things blow up. Now before I move on, I've got to mention that Moon Patrol is responsible for 2 landmarks in gaming. It's the first game to have full parallax scrolling. Now a game called Jump Bug from a year before had partial parallax scrolling, but Moon Patrol was the first to have 3 separate layers scrolling at different speeds. The other first from Moon Patrol was the ability to continue your game after losing all your lives. In essence, the game just gives you more lives for another coin. I could kind of see why they did that though. The game only gets harder as you go along, so odds are if somebody continues, the time they'll spend on the machine with that quarter will be less than if they had started the game from the beginning. Ten-Yard Fight is our next game, and it was released in arcades in 1983 by Irem in Japan, and in 1985 in the US under license from Taito. The game only had 2 console ports back in the day, one for the MSX, only in Japan, and one for the NES/Famicom. Now Irem published 10-Yard Fight for both the MSX and Famicom in Japan, but for North America, the game was significantly retooled and released as a launch title for the NES under the Nintendo label. So if you're familiar with the North American version of 10-Yard Fight for the NES, well, this arcade version is significantly different despite the visuals looking very similar. Now I've got vague memories of playing the NES version of 10-Yard Fight at a friend's house, and I don't remember much except that it wasn't much fun to play. So I was kind of interested in firing this arcade version up and seeing if I'd feel the same way. When I first started playing, I happened to be out that day in a situation knowing I'd be waiting around for a while, so I'd brought along my Evercade EXP and initially started playing on the handheld. I was surprised that the game didn't play anything like I expected. For starters, this is only a 1-player game. I mean, sure, 2 people can play, but you take turns and you're not directly competing against one another. You're only playing to see who gets the highest score. Secondly, you only play on offense. The computer always controls the defense. If you do anything that results in a turnover, you just lose yardage instead of giving up control of the ball. The last major change is that scoring is not standard football scoring. It's more or less video game scoring. For example, you score 1,000 points for completing a pass, and anywhere from 100 to 1,000 points for completing a first down, and anywhere between 5,000 and 8,000 points for getting a touchdown. Then I realized, oh, I see what they're doing here. They aren't going for a standard football game. Rather, the goal is just to score a touchdown before the time runs out. It makes sense for a single-player arcade football game. It also made sense why the NES version didn't work so well, because they tried to convert this into a standard football game. For clarity, the Japanese Famicom and MSX versions all played like the arcade version. Only the North American NES title tried to undergo this transformation. So here's how the game plays out. Computer kicks the ball to you, and you travel as far up the field as you can without being tackled. The ball is set at the yardage where you were taken down, and you have 4 chances to advance the ball at least 10 yards. You cannot call plays, and the computer-controlled defense seems to line up in random formations. When the players are ready and the quarterback starts yelling, you press a button to hike the ball. But before you do that, it's important to pay attention to the guy running across the screen from the right to the left. When the ball is hiked, that guy will start running up the screen. It took me a while to realize this, but that's the dude you'll be passing the ball to if you choose to pass the ball. So try to get him to run to where you think no defenders will be. So the ball is hiked, the quarterback has the ball, and you have the option to run or pass to your receiver, or you can side pass to the player to your right or left. The game only has 2 buttons, one is for passing and one is for the side pass. If you do a side pass and give control of the ball to another player, he can either run or he can still pass to the receiver. Now this is very, very important. If you are performing a pass or a side pass, be very, very sure that nobody from the other team is anywhere in the vicinity of the player performing the pass or will be in the path that the ball will be traveling because they will always intercept the ball as long as they aren't diving or on the ground. Having your pass intercepted will set you back 20 yards, but you'll be on your first down again. If you cannot make 10 yards in 4 attempts, well, normally the other team would get the ball, but here you're penalized 10 yards and you start at first down again. Now, while all this is going on, the game's timer is counting down. Every time you succeed in gaining at least 10 yards, time will be added to the clock, but if you can't score a touchdown before the timer hits 0, the game ends. If you do score a touchdown, you'll go for an extra point either by kicking a field goal or running the ball into the end zone. Then you get to play the second half of the game, and everything just repeats again, starting with the kickoff. If you score a touchdown in the second half, well, not only do you advance to a higher level in difficulty, but you'll get to see the cheerleaders. So that's something. The game starts at the high school level, then moves on to the college level, then the pro level, and then the Super Bowl level. If you score a touchdown in both halves of the Super Bowl level, well, that just repeats until you run out of time and the game ends. Again, you're not really playing a game of football. You're just out to score as many points as you can under the guise of a football game. So, while I was waiting, playing this on the handheld and figuring most of this out, I was actually getting quite frustrated. It seemed that every time I threw the ball, it would be intercepted, and every time a defender touched me, I was never able to break free. I was starting to think that I wasn't going to like this game at all. But then I got home and I plugged it into the Evercade VS and started playing it with an arcade stick, and I'll tell you that it was a world of difference. You see, if the opponent dives at your player and makes contact, you're just instantly tackled. But if they run into you, you can break free by wiggling the joystick, and that was something I just wasn't able to do very well with the D-pad on the handheld. With the arcade stick, I was able to break free instantly nearly every time. Soon it became part of my strategy. Let the opponent make contact, and then break free, and then run or pass. I was also able to figure out passing without getting intercepted all the time, and I was really starting to have a blast with this game. I tell you, if you're playing this on the handheld and getting frustrated, if you have the means, plug this into the Evercade VS and try playing with an arcade stick. You can really truly tell that that's how the game was meant to be played. Perhaps the most well-known game in this collection is R-Type, which was released into Japanese arcades in 1987. An interesting thing I didn't realize until very recently was that the game was released in North American arcades under license from Nintendo. It's just kind of odd because R-Type is a game I don't think anyone associates with Nintendo these days, however their logo is right there on the marquee. The reason I say this game is probably the most well-known is because it's received a ton of home console ports, and it's still receiving sequels to this day, with the next one to be released this year in 2023. That would be the 7th game in the series, R-Type Final 3. Anyway, R-Type is a horizontally scrolling shoot-'em-up where you'll pilot your R9 ship in an attempt to defeat the evil Bydo Empire. I am saying that right? The Bydo Empire, B-Y-D-O. I mean, I've never actually heard anyone say it out loud before, so that's how I guess it'd be pronounced. Well, anyway, you'll start with only your single standard bullet shots where you do have to repeatedly tap the fire button to fire continuously, but that's only because if you hold the button down, you could charge up for a more powerful shot. However, like any good shoot-'em-up, you'll be able to pick up power-ups left behind by certain enemies throughout the game. These pickups can be an increase in your ship's movement speed, an ability to fire a set of homing missiles, and there's a trio of laser crystals in the colors of red, blue, and yellow. Each one does represent a different type of additional weapon to fire. However, by collecting one of these for the first time, it'll introduce the thing that cements R-Type as a more strategic shoot-'em-up, and that's the Force Pod. It will float onto the screen and can be attached to the front or the rear of the ship, and once attached, it'll fire an additional weapon defined by the color of the power-up last picked up. Red produces a set of powerful lasers that intertwine as they're fired. Blue produces a few lasers that fire in 3 directions and will bounce and ricochet off walls. And yellow creates a flame that will fire upward and downward and then travel along any floor or ceiling it makes contact with. Collecting multiples of these crystals will not power up these weapons any further. However, there is a separate button for attaching and detaching the Force Pod, and when the pod is detached, you'll no longer be able to fire your special weapon, but the pod will then fire standard bullets on its own, and depending on how many you've collected, it'll determine how many bullets it can fire at once. So the force pod is already a versatile weapon, as you can use it to fire in front of you, or in back of you, or send it out to attack enemies you don't want to go near. But it's also invincible, which you can use to your advantage by using it as a shield to block your ships from most enemy bullets. It can't block the larger and more powerful attacks, so you'll still have to dodge those. There is one last power-up you can get, and that's what's called a bit, that'll just kind of hang out by your ship for the most part. You can have 2 of these, and they actually won't do anything unless you're firing the red power-up laser weapon, then they'll fire bullets as well. But other than that, they do nothing. These can also block bullets though, the same as the force pod, so they're still quite handy to have around. Not only that, but they'll cause damage to and destroy most enemies they touch, so they'll help in preventing enemies from getting too close to your ship. Now if you know what you're doing, this can kind of be a short game despite the fact there are 8 levels. If you can play through without dying once, you can play through all 8 levels in less than 20 minutes. Without dying, you'll encounter the first boss in less than 2 minutes. But this game will take some serious practice, because if you're not prepared in knowing what you'll encounter next, it's possible you'll have the force bit attached the wrong way, or collected the wrong power-up not ideal for the situation you're in, and it only takes 1 hit to destroy your ship, where you'll then have to continue from the most recent checkpoint with all of your power-ups removed, making the game even harder than it just was. But the brisk pace of the game means it doesn't feel like a drag, even if you continue from the beginning, because it won't take too long to get to where you were, and you'll be better prepared when you do get to where you were. I always really liked this game because of its strategic element. There are a lot of Twitch-based shoot-em-ups out there, but in this one, you really gotta plan your actions in advance based on where the enemies will show up. The bosses of each level are really cool looking as well, especially the boss at the end of level 1. That boss is so iconic that it always shows up in screenshots for the game, as well as the box art, and even in the arcade machine's marquee and side art. The only thing I really have to remember when playing this game is not to pick up every speed up power up I see, because the ship will get to the point to where it's moving so fast I can barely control it. Near the end of 1987, Irem released Battle Chopper into arcades, or as it was named in Japan, Mr. Heli no Daioboken, which translates to Mr. Heli's Great Adventure. The game was ported to the PC Engine only in Japan, and received numerous home computer ports in Europe, where the game was simply known as Mr. Heli. The year is 2999, and Mr. Heli is dispatched to take on Mr. Muddy and his hordes of underlings, or something like that. The story matters so little that the game itself won't even tell you what it is, and you only get a hint of what it is only after you beat the game, which most people are unlikely to do, even with infinite continues, and I'll explain about that later. Battle Chopper / Mr. Heli is a unique multi-directional shoot-em-up. The screen doesn't automatically advance in most stages like it does for games in this genre, but rather each stage has a timer to keep you moving. Another unique feature is that Mr. Heli will always face in the direction you move him, which can be good or bad depending on your situation. Also, there's a health meter, so one bullet won't instantly kill you. Well, most of the time. You've got 2 buttons for firing weapons, one for your forward lasers, and another for launching homing missiles upwards. You know, this may be the only shoot-em-up where homing missiles are standard. It's not overpowered though, because the fire rate on them is extremely slow. Not only that, but there's no autofire in this game, so you're gonna be hammering away on both buttons simultaneously the entire time you play if you want continuous fire. And you're going to want continuous fire. Fortunately though, bumping into walls, the ceiling, or ground won't harm you in the least. In fact, if you land on the ground, Mr. Heli's homing missile attack becomes one where he drops bombs. But wait, you might be thinking, why would I want to drop bombs if I'm on the ground? Well, throughout the game there are breakable blocks, and dropping the bombs may be the only way to destroy the ones on the ground. Breaking blocks will also uncover power-ups and abilities that can be purchased by flying over them if you have the money. Kind of weird if you think about it. In most shoot-em-ups, flying into a power-up is good enough to collect it, but here you've got to have enough money for it as well. Power-ups include increasing laser firing spread, increasing the number of homing missiles released, a force field, instant elimination of all blocks on the screen, and recovering lost health. There are 5 levels in total, each with an end boss, but each level contains sub-bosses as well. I kind of like this game, but it's one of the most difficult games I've ever played, and it's not really challenging in a fun way. One annoyance is how the enemies just keep constantly spawning if you stay in an area for too long for whatever reason. But the main problem is what happens when you die. Not only do you get sent all the way back to the beginning of the section you were in, but you lose all of your power-ups as well. It's kind of like Gradius in that way. However, just to give you an extra kick in the gut while you're down, the game also takes away all the money you've collected as well. You know, just to make sure you can't afford to buy the power-ups you may immediately see when continuing. This means if you die fighting the final boss of a stage, you get sent back incredibly far, and you have to continue worse off than you originally were at that point. And in the later stages, the bosses are incredibly, extremely, horrendously tough. So when I said you're unlikely to finish this game even with infinite continues, that's why. Hell, this game is still incredibly tough to beat abusing save states on the Evercade. But the edited footage does make me look like an expert though, doesn't it? Our 5th game here is Lightning Swords, or as it was known in the original Japanese release, Kengo. This game was released into Japanese arcades in 1989 and European arcades in 1991. And that's it. Like literally, there was no other way to play this game. There was no North American arcade release, and as far as I can tell, this game was never ported to any console or computer. And no, this Evercade version doesn't count as a port because it's just an emulated arcade run. But because there were only 2 releases, and each one under a different name, if you're searching for information on this game, you're gonna have to search for both Lightning Swords and Kengo, because this game is listed differently depending on what website you visit. The game itself is a unique slash-em-up wherein you play as either the blue or red dragon out to defeat an evil army after the assassination of Princess Orchid, something you get to witness in the game's opening cutscene. For controls, you get an 8-way joystick and 1 button to swing your sword. At first I thought it was kind of unusual that you need to push up to jump, but it works out well for this game and I never had an issue with it. Now the unique thing about the attack button is if you hold it down, not only will it charge a more powerful sword slash, but while charging, your character will take up a defensive stance and will be able to deflect most attacks regardless if they are melee or ranged. In addition to that, your movement is not hindered in any way by taking up this defensive stance. You can even jump and face whichever way you need to in midair while still retaining this defensive stance. It's actually quite satisfying to be able to successfully block attacks coming from both sides, or even just to block one enemy's attack only to immediately release the button and counter with a fully powered up slash. While the game does make you feel super powerful at times, it's still not the easiest of games, especially if you go for the good ending, which I'll touch upon later. Anyone could just leisurely play through this one since you can continue right where you left off by inserting another coin once you lose all your lives. It's just that your score resets when you continue. Now, since getting to the end of this one is kind of easy if you don't care about how many times you continue, I'm going to talk about the ending to this game, so just skip over to the next section if you don't want to hear about it. Now, this game is kind of short in that there are only 5 stages, and you can reach stage 5 in about 10 to 15 minutes. And stage 5 actually looks like a really cool stage, but then you'll discover that you have to fight the 4 previous bosses again before actually reaching the final boss. And after he's defeated, you get a 2-page epilogue that ends with, "However, the decisive battle has yet to be waged." And I was like, huh? Is there more? You then get a shot of the 2 warriors, then a black screen that says, "Thank you, try again." And I was like, what do you mean, try again? Then the image of the 2 warriors comes back with the text "Special Game" overlaid. And do you know what this special game is? It's the same game again, only a bit harder. And I'm like, really? The reward for beating the game is to play the game again? And nothing is really significantly different, it's just a bit harder than before. But surely an alternate ending would make it worthwhile to play through the game again. Well, again, spoilers. But the end is exactly the same, except the last line of text is changed to read, "At long last, peace and stability are here to stay." And then the game actually ends with a game over. I mean, like, come on. If you're making people play through the game twice, at least make the ending a second time around significantly different than the first time. Change all the text, change the images, change something more than just one sentence. I mean, okay, the game is fun, I'm not denying that, but making people play the game twice just feels like a cheap way to make the game feel bigger than it actually is. And then to give people who actually played through it twice what feels like no reward for doing so, it's just mind-boggling to me. Our final game in this collection is In the Hunt from 1993, which was originally titled Kaitai Densensu in Japan, and this translates to Great Underwater War. And it's easy to see that this is the case, as this is a horizontally scrolling shoot-'em-up featuring submarines. The evil organization known as the Dark Anarchy Society, or DAS, has used a doomsday machine to melt the polar ice caps, thus flooding the entire world. Since they were the only ones prepared for this catastrophic event, they easily rule over the survivors using their advanced military weaponry. The United Ocean Garrison, an organization formed by the remaining survivors, have been secretly planning to strike back with a newly developed submarine known as the Granvia. Upon learning that the DAS has been developing a new superweapon, they decide that they must strike their headquarters directly to have any chance of ridding the world of every DAS weapon now and in the future. This mission can be tackled by 1 or 2 players, and there are 4 different endings, which is quite unusual for an arcade game. These endings are triggered by a single player completing the game using continues, and another ending for not using continues. There are another 2 endings for 2 players, but I won't spoil how to get those here. I'll just say that it doesn't involve how many continues you use, but it'll be somewhat obvious how to get the 2 endings once the end of the game is reached. Another little fact I found out about the story is that there's actually a series of Irem games that revolve around the Dark Anarchy Society, and In the Hunt is the 3rd game to feature the organization as the antagonist. The other games are Air Duel from 1990, Undercover Cops from 1992, and Gun Force 2 from 1994. As mentioned, this is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, but because the weapons are submarines traveling underwater, there are a few twists in the gameplay that make it unique. Most noticeably is that the game doesn't automatically scroll. It's up to the player on how fast to proceed through each level, though you can't take forever as you must complete objectives within the time limit or lose a life. Another unique feature is your weaponry. You've got 2 attack buttons, one for frontal attacks and one for vertical attacks. Even at your base level, you've got front-firing missiles, depth charges that can be dropped from below, and missiles that fire upwards, though they will stop once they hit the surface of the water. However, if you bring your submarine to the surface, you'll then fire an alternate attack upwards and be able to strike anything above the water. Both the frontal and upwards attack can be altered and upgraded through power-ups that can be collected from destroyed vessels. You'll occasionally run across these treasure balls. They're these red spheres with a star on them, and I actually didn't know what they were for a while, but it turns out if you collect 100 of them, you get an extra life. This is an extremely fun game that's easy to jump into and play despite how difficult it can be, and that's primarily because despite taking only 1 hit to be destroyed, when you lose a life, or even continue after losing all your lives, you'll resume right where you left off, and even though you lose all your weapon upgrades, it doesn't feel like you're all of a sudden extremely underpowered like you would be in something like R-Type or Gradius. And though it can be tough to try and go for that ending you would get for not using any continues, I would argue that the ending you get with using continues is far more interesting, and I'd rather see that ending when beating the game. Finally, it has to be said that the game's graphics and animations are absolutely fantastic, though there are occasions where the game will slow down when there are too many objects on the screen. I saw it described somewhere that the game is kinda like R-Type crossed with Metal Slug, and that's certainly not hard to see. In fact, the game looks a lot like an early Metal Slug game, and that's no coincidence as this title was made from the same Irem employees that would later go on to form Nazca, who developed the Metal Slug series. Now let's just hope we get a Metal Slug collection for the Evercade sometime in the future. All right, those are all the games in Irem Arcade 1. Ranking the games from my least favorite to my favorite. Well, at the bottom of the list at number 6 would be Battle Chopper. It's an okay game. I did kind of like it. It's just, it does get frustrating. At number 5, I'm going to put Moon Patrol. Thought it would be a lot higher, but I did think it was great. I gave it an 8, but that just means, the other 4 games I gave an even higher score. And a number 4 spot is 10-Yard Fight. I actually thought this was going to be one of the games I didn't like. I thought it was going to be at the bottom of the list, but as I was playing it, I was understanding it and how different it was from the NES version. I actually really liked it, and actually, it was one of the first games I played, and I thought it was going to be near the top of the list, but the next 3 actually beat it out. The next being at number 3 spot, Lightning Swords. I also gave it an 8. Really fun game. Not a whole lot of people have played it because it was very limited. It never got any ports other than the limited arcade releases it saw. So what beats it? Well, in the number 2 spot, I gave it a 9. R-Type. It was a really tough choice between R-Type and In the Hunt, which one I was gonna put in the number 1 spot, but R-Type is in the number 2 spot, and of course In the Hunt is in my number 1 spot. Both of them got 9s. I thought both of them were fantastic, not perfect, but extremely fun to play. And I think I just gave In the Hunt the edge just because you could do 2 players. It did have multiple endings. It did have, it was more entertaining to watch. The animation was so much better than R-Type. It was just, not that the animation in R-Type was bad, it's just that everything was just so well animated in The Hunt. It does suffer from a bit of slowdown here or there, but other than that, fantastic game. That's going to wrap it up. Next up, I'm going to be working on Toa Plan Arcade 1. So until next time, see you then.